My name Jennifer. While I was at work in Boston, Massachusetts, I had no idea that betrayal was unfolding behind the walls of my own house. My sister-in-law Carolyn, a woman who had always draped herself in smug superiority, had decided to strike where she knew it would hurt most. She swapped out my champion golden retriever, Max, for a mutt from the city shelter. She did it deliberately, cruelly, and with the satisfaction of someone who thought they had finally won. When I came home to my white two-story house on Cambridge Street, with its black shutters and the wraparound porch I had painted myself, the silence was off. Normally, Max would come bounding down the hallway, nails tapping against the hardwood, tail wagging like a metronome of joy. That day, a dog did appear, but it was not Max. The mutt looked frightened, eyes darting around like he knew he didn't belong. His coat was patchy, his body thin, his stance timid. My heart sank into something cold and sharp. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. Instead, I crouched down and looked into the mutt's eyes. He trembled when I reached out. That's when I knew this wasn't some mistake or accident. This was intentional. Later that evening, Carolyn called me. Her voice carried that shrill brand of delight only she could summon. "Now your precious pup is making someone else happy," she sneered, laughing as though she had gifted me a lesson in humility. I smiled to myself, though she couldn't see it. "Interesting," I replied evenly, my tone calm, almost curious. That single word was all I gave her, and that single word was enough for me. Because Carolyn, smug and foolish, had no idea what she had just started. Carolyn had always despised me. She hated the way people liked me in our family gatherings, how David, my husband, stood by me instead of bowing to her theatrics. She despised how I built a stable life, my home, my career, my dog, while she floundered through half-baked ventures and shallow friendships. Carolyn, with her flashy clothes bought on credit and her fake charm, always needed to one-up me. This time she thought she had. She thought taking Max, my champion, my companion, would break me. But what she didn't understand is this: I don't break. I bend, I coil, and then I strike back harder than anyone anticipates. As I sat in my living room that night, the mutt curled nervously in a corner. I felt anger spread through me like fire. Not the kind of fleeting anger that fades after sleep. No, this was the kind of anger that fuels revolutions. The kind that sharpens into focus and becomes a weapon. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, the kind David kept for special occasions, and let the taste burn down my throat. My hands were steady. That told me everything I needed to know. Carolyn had crossed the line. I replayed her laugh in my head, the smug rhythm of her words. She thought she was untouchable because she was family. Because David wouldn't let me go too far. But family, to me, has never been a shield for cruelty. Blood only means something if loyalty runs through it, and Carolyn had none. Revenge began writing itself in my mind. It wasn't about getting Max back. I knew I would, one way or another. This was about teaching Carolyn that betrayal carries a price. That mocking me, underestimating me, and ripping away something I love would bring her consequences she could never imagine. I thought back to the times she'd come into my home, looking around with veiled envy, her eyes lingering on the polished oak floors and the carefully chosen art on the walls. I remembered the snide comments she'd made about how expensive it must be to maintain a house like this on Cambridge Street, as though I didn't earn every dollar myself. I remembered the way she flinched whenever someone praised Max for his discipline, his beauty, his worth. Jealousy runs deep in people like Carolyn. It corrodes them, makes them reckless. She had finally acted on hers. That night, as I stared out the window at the streetlights of Boston glowing in the damp air, I began forming my plan. Carolyn liked to believe she had power because she had money. But the truth was, she didn't have real money. She had the appearance of it. She and her husband lived in a New York City penthouse they could barely afford, drowning in debt hidden under layers of luxury. I knew because David had let it slip once, after too much whiskey, that Caroline's so-called fortune was really borrowed pounds and dollars, stacked high like a house of cards. Perfect. I thought about how easy it would be to pull one card out from underneath her, and not just one. Every single one, until her precious little tower crumbled into nothing. But it wouldn't just be financial. Oh no, That would be too clean, too merciful. Carolyn needed to feel what it meant to lose something that mattered, something irreplaceable. Just as I have felt when I walked through my front door and realized Max was gone. I poured another glass of bourbon and wrote her name in a notebook, Carolyn. Underneath it, I wrote one word, debt. My mind was already turning, spinning the threads of vengeance into a web. I would entangle her so tightly that every breath she took would feel like a reminder of what she had done to me. The mutt in the corner whimpered softly, and I glanced at him. It wasn't his fault he'd been caught up in Caroline's petty cruelty. I walked over, crouched down, and gently stroked his head. His trembling slowed, and he licked my hand hesitantly. "Don't worry," I whispered. "You're safe here." "But she's not." I stood up, fire burning in my chest. From that moment, Caroline's laughter became the soundtrack of my determination. She thought she had power because she took my dog. She thought I would crumble, but instead, she had given me fuel. She had opened the door to a side of me she never knew existed. And I was going to show everyone, that when I am wronged, when I am pushed, I don't just push back. I destroy. The swap wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Caroline always thought money could shield her from consequences. She strutted around family gatherings with her designer handbags and manicured nails, always making sure everyone saw the glimmer of her jewelry before they heard the sharpness of her tongue. But I knew the truth. She didn't have wealth. She had debt, and worse, she had enemies. I remembered the way she once whined to her so-called friend on the phone, not realizing I was nearby. She had muttered something about owing $20,000 to Vincent Halley, a man whose name carried a dangerous echo in New York City. Loan shark, thug, businessman, call him what you want, but Vincent was a man who didn't forget what people owed him. That number, 20,000, burned into my brain like an engraving on steel. Not because I cared about her debt, but because debts are weaknesses, and weaknesses are weapons when placed in the right hands. Caroline had given me a gift, though she didn't know it yet. I bought myself a leather notebook that same week, smooth black cover, unmarked. It wasn't just a journal, it was my ledger of revenge. Inside, I began to record every detail of Caroline's life, every lie, every insult, every fragile crack in her glittering facade. I wrote about her shopping trips where she pretended to pay in full but whispered to clerks to hold items until her next paycheck. I wrote about her drunken slips, her late-night art. Max wasn't just a pet. He was my companion, my protector. On nights when David was away in Chicago for business trips, Max kept me grounded. He curled up by my bed, his steady breathing anchoring me through the loneliness.
He trotted beside me on runs along the Charles River, tail wagging, ears alert, always watchful. He wasn't just a champion dog, he was my family.
Carolyn hadn't stolen a possession. She had tried to steal part of my soul. And for that, she deserved a punishment far greater than she could imagine. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about rage exploding in the moment. That kind of fire burns too quickly, leaving ashes and nothing else. No, true revenge is patient, deliberate, a controlled burn that consumes everything at its own pace. I would be patient. I would sharpen every detail, every fact, until it cut her from all sides. The first step was information. Caroline loved to flaunt her penthouse in Manhattan, pretending she was the queen of the city, but she never realized how transparent she was. She bragged about dinners that cost $500, about champagne that flowed like water, about business contacts she barely understood. And yet, in the same breath, she whispered to her husband about bills piling up, about mortgage payments falling behind, about the fear of bankruptcy. She thought her secrets were safe. They weren't, not from me. I made calls, discreet ones. I spoke to an old college friend who worked in a real estate firm in New York. I asked innocent questions about penthouse financing, about foreclosure rates, about how easy it was to expose delinquent accounts. What I learned thrilled me. Carolyn and Charles were treading on thin ice. One wrong move, one push in the wrong direction, and their little kingdom would collapse. As I wrote everything down in my ledger, I felt the aggression building inside me, like a storm pressing against glass. Caroline thought she had won. But in reality, she had set her own destruction in motion. I began small. I left little reminders for her, subtle hints that I was watching. An anonymous note slipped into her designer purse when she wasn't looking at a family dinner. Debt has a way of finding you. I watched her face pale as she read it, her eyes darting around the table, suspecting everyone but me. Another time, I sent her a package with a single dog collar inside, not Max's, but one that looked like his. No note, just the collar. She didn't mention it to anyone, but the next time I saw her, her hand shook as she reached for her glass of wine. Aggression didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was quieter, sharper, more personal. But there were louder moves to make too. Through whispers, through small connections, I found a way to reach Vincent Halle. I didn't meet him directly. That would have been reckless. But I made sure word slipped to him that Carolyn wasn't being honest about her finances, that she might be hiding more than just $20,000 in unpaid debt. I didn't give him everything. Just enough to whet his appetite. Sharks don't need to be fed whole meals. They need only a drop of blood in the water to frenzy. When Carolyn called me a few weeks later, her voice was thinner than usual. "Jennifer," she said, trying to sound casual, "have you heard anything strange? I feel like someone's been following me." I let silence hang between us before replying, "You should be careful, Carolyn. This city isn't as safe as it used to be." I could almost hear her swallowing her fear through the phone. She had no idea how deep I was already in her world, how closely I was pulling the strings. And I wasn't finished. Not even close. The ledger grew thicker with every passing day. Notes, receipts, overheard conversations. Carolyn's world was unraveling, thread by thread, and I was holding the scissors. One night I closed the ledger, ran my hand across the leather cover, and whispered to myself, "This isn't just revenge, this is justice." Because in America, betrayal is a debt. And debts, sooner or later, must be collected. Weeks passed, but the rage inside me never dimmed. If anything, it sharpened. The nights were the worst, lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the empty spot on the floor beside me a constant reminder that Max wasn't there. The mutt Carolyn had dumped in his place had grown calmer, even affectionate. But he could never replace Max. He was a living reminder of Caroline's cruelty, her deliberate act of theft. Every time I looked at him, I didn't feel pity anymore. I felt determination. One evening, while scribbling in my ledger, I got a call from an old friend who worked part-time at the city shelter. Her voice was hushed, as though she was telling me state secrets. "Jennifer," she whispered, "I shouldn't be saying this, but I think I know what happened to Max." Carolyn bribed one of the volunteers, $500 in cash, to move a golden retriever out of the system. They sent him to an adoption event in Philadelphia. My grip tightened on the phone. A slow smile crept across my face, though my teeth were clenched. $500. That was all my sister-in-law thought Max was worth. 500 pathetic dollars to rip a piece of my soul from me. "Thank you," I told my friend. My voice was steady, but beneath it boiled an aggression that could have melted steel. I didn't wait. The very next morning I packed a bag, loaded my car, and started the 6-hour drive from Boston to Philadelphia. The interstate stretched ahead of me, endless gray lines cutting through forests and towns, but my mind was locked on a single target. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I didn't even play music. All I could hear was Caroline's laughter echoing in my memory. "Now your precious pup is making someone else happy." I pressed the accelerator harder, my fury fueling every mile. By the time I reached Philadelphia, night had fallen. My contact had given me an address, a suburban street lined with modest houses, each with a small yard and chain-link fence. I parked across the street, turned off my headlights, and sat in the dark watching. There he was. My heart slammed against my ribs when I saw him, my Max, chained to a stake in the yard like some unwanted mutt. His once glorious coat was dull, his head hung low, but when he lifted his eyes and spotted me, something flickered. Recognition. I got out of the car slowly, my chest aching with both joy and fury. I approached the family who had taken him in. They were ordinary people, a man in his 40s, a woman with tired eyes, and 2 kids playing on the porch. They looked at me with suspicion when I explained who I was. "That dog was given to us at the adoption fair," the man said. His voice carried no malice, only confusion. They told us he was abandoned. We've been taking care of him the best we can. I reached into my purse, pulled out a thick envelope of cash and held it up. $2,000, I said firmly. Cash, right now, he is mine and he is coming home with me. The man hesitated. The woman's eyes widened at the sight of the money. The kids had gone quiet, watching like it was some kind of standoff. Finally, the man exhaled, long and heavy. Take him, he muttered, shaking his head. We didn't know. I didn't thank them. I didn't waste another second. I unhooked the chain myself, dropping to my knees to wrap my arms around Max. His fur was rougher, dirtier than I remembered, but the warmth of him, the weight of him, felt like home. Tears burned my eyes as I buried my face in his neck. I've got you, boy, I whispered. You're safe now. She never touched you again. But as I held him, joy mingled with fury. Carolyn had not only stolen him, but when I pulled into my driveway at dawn, Max leapt out of the car and ran to the front porch as though he had never left. He barked, tail wagging, head lifted proudly. For a moment I allowed myself to smile. Then I turned and looked back down the street toward the world Carolyn still thought she controlled. My smile hardened. Carolyn had always loved her games, her little manipulations, her tricks. She thought of herself as clever. But now she had played with something sacred. And when people play with fire, they forget. Fire doesn't play back, it burns. Over the next few days, I made sure Carolyn knew I had Max again. Not directly. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of a phone call. Instead, I sent her a photo. Max sitting tall in front of my house, his golden coat gleaming again after a bath, his eyes bright with triumph. No caption. No words, just the picture. The next morning I received a single text from her. You bitch. I laughed out loud, the sound sharp and victorious. She was rattled, good, because what was coming would make that rattling feel like a whisper compared to the roar of destruction I planned to unleash. I began collecting every shred of information I had on her debt, her fake wealth, her brittle social circle in New York. I wasn't going to just inconvenience her. I wasn't going to simply expose her lies. I was going to grind her down, strip away every ounce of her pretentious glamour, and leave her broken. She would learn that betrayal in my house was a crime with no pardon. I stroked Max's head as he lay beside me on the couch, his steady breathing filling the silence. We've got work to do, boy, I whispered. She thought she could take you from me. Now we'll take everything from her. And in that moment I swore to myself, Carolyn would regret ever underestimating me. Revenge, I knew, couldn't just be emotional. That would be too soft, too fleeting. I needed it to be devastating, irreversible, something that would etch itself into Caroline's bones and remind her every single day that betraying me was the worst mistake of her life. Max was home, his golden coat shining again, his spirit slowly recovering from the weeks of neglect. Every time I stroked his head, every time he laid by my feet, I remembered the empty space Carolyn had created in my life. That emptiness had been filled now, not with peace, but with fire. And that fire demanded I take Caroline's world apart piece by piece. I began with the ledger, my leather-bound book of notes, rumors, overheard conversations, and documented truths. But truth wasn't enough. Truth is stable, predictable. To destroy someone like Caroline, I needed a weapon made from lies wrapped around truth, something sharp enough to pierce her arrogance. I crafted what I called her secret ledger. It was a file of forged receipts, falsified loan slips, and photographs I'd manipulated to show her meeting with people she'd never met. I exaggerated her debt, made it appear as though she owed not just $20,000, but $50,000 to the wrong kind of people. And then, with a steady hand, I slipped the poison into her bloodstream. I mailed the file to Vincent Halley, the loan shark she already feared. I didn't need to convince him much. Men like Vincent don't verify. They assume, they pounce, they punish. Within weeks, Caroline's world began to tilt. I could see it in her eyes at family dinners, the way her laughter had become brittle, how her hands twitched when she raised her glass. She avoided me, and yet her gaze always lingered just long enough to betray her suspicion. She didn't know what I had done, but she felt it. Fear has a way of crawling under the skin and rotting from the inside. Then came the phone call. I was sitting in my living room, Max stretched across my lap when my phone buzzed. Caroline's name lit the screen. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. Her voice was broken, unrecognizable. "Jennifer," she whispered, her words stumbling over themselves. "Please. Please, I need help. They're saying I owe 50,000. I can't pay it. They're threatening." She broke off into a sob, choking on her own desperation. I let silence hang heavy. I stroked Max's fur slowly, letting her sobs fill the air. Then, with a voice calm and smooth, I said, "Caroline, I told you before, actions have consequences. Maybe now you'll understand." And I hung up. Her begging meant nothing to me. She hadn't begged when she stole my dog. She hadn't wept when she mocked me, laughing at my pain. No, she had smiled and flaunted her cruelty. And now, she could drown in the same cruelty she once delivered. Not long after, the notices came. Her penthouse in New York, the one she paraded like a crown jewel, went up for auction. Her jewelry, pawned off for scraps compared to their supposed worth. The glamorous image she had built cracked in public view. Her so-called friends, the ones who sipped champagne at her parties, vanished like smoke. No one clings to a sinking ship when the water starts pouring in. But I wasn't done. I made sure her humiliation was public. I leaked whispers to her social circle, fake stories about her affairs, rumors about unpaid bills and bounced checks. I orchestrated anonymous tips to the tabloids that painted her as a fraud. A woman living far beyond her means. A desperate wife clawing at the edges of high society. Her name appeared in headlines, mocked and pitied, dragged through the mud she once made others walk through. And Caroline? She fell apart. The last time I saw her in person was by chance, outside a courthouse in Manhattan. She looked nothing like the woman she once pretended to be. Her hair was unkempt, her designer clothes swapped for a wrinkled blazer that hung too loosely on her frame. She spotted me across the street, and for a moment our eyes locked. The hatred there was sharp, but buried beneath it was fear. Fear of me, fear of what I had done, what I was capable of doing again. I smiled at her. Not mockingly, not cruelly, just a small, quiet smile, the kind of smile that says, "I won. And I always will." She turned away first. Back in Boston, I sat in my home, Max curled by the fire. The mutt she had left me with still lived here too, though calmer now, happy even. I kept him because he was proof of the swap, proof of her malice, proof of the revenge I had carved from her downfall. Both dogs were mine now, loyal, safe, and loved. Caroline had tried to take one family from me, and instead I had gained another. When people ask me now about revenge, I tell them the truth. I don't dress it up. I don't soften the edges. I say in America loyalty is priceless, betrayal is costly. And when someone betrays me, I don't just take back what's mine. I take everything, because that's what I did. I took Caroline's laughter, her money, her home, her reputation. I took her pride and shattered it into dust. I left her with nothing but the echo of her own cruelty, turned back on her tenfold. And yet, even after all of it, I don't regret a single move. She thought she could wound me and walk away unscathed. She thought family ties would shield her. But I am not a woman who forgives betrayal. I'm a woman who avenges it. So when I sit on my porch at night, looking out at Cambridge Street with Max at my feet, I let that same quiet smile curve my lips. Because Caroline never understood that revenge isn't just about anger. It's about balance. She tipped the scales when she took Max from me. I restored them. Aggressively. Absolutely. And my name is Jennifer, the woman who takes everything back with interest.